Anita Sarkeesian and the importance of taking criticism. Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and I'm sure you've heard by now that Anita Sarkeesian finally lost her cool publicly when faced with the mere possibility of the notion that she might have to actually interact with some of her critics while she was speaking on a panel at VidCon. She freaked out just from seeing Sargon of Akkad in the audience and called him a garbage human being, along with some other stuff that she said into a microphone. Now, I think this moment will very likely go down in history as one of the turning points in the culture war that is fourth wave intersectional feminist social justice warriors waging cultural war on, well, basically everybody in the Western world that values critical thinking, egalitarianism, and freedom of speech. I personally fully support Sargon's petition to get Anita removed from the panel that she is on tomorrow about cyberbullying at VidCon. Not just because she did very blatantly and thoroughly break VidCon's rules of conduct, as Sargon illustrates in his video that I will link in the description, but more so, I think that if she gets in some sort of official trouble, as a result, the feminists of the internet, who have been the biggest bullies on the entire internet over the past 5 years or so, while being enabled by the authorities in media, social media, and even government, I believe that if she gets in trouble, that feminists as a demographic will thus be forced to have the conversation that they have been doing everything they can to avoid this entire time, which will be to admit that their shit also stinks and that their poor behavior has consequences too. But I digress. How did we even end up in this situation? Why is it that Anita, one of the least agreed with people on the entire internet, gets to sit on an official panel in front of an auditorium of people, including a critic of hers who is wildly more popular? Why does she feel entitled to flagrantly insult her more popular critic on a microphone, expecting to get away with it and to be applauded? Well, obviously, we would have to look into politics to answer that question fully, but I've done that in countless videos, like my most viewed one that is about the fourth wave feminist movement. Ultimately, like more and more people are finally starting to realize, this has always been about authoritarianism and using the victim narrative to justify shutting down dissenting viewpoints. But still, all politics aside, the politicians in power would have still needed their token useful idiots who are willing to peddle this victim narrative by being the token fragile maiden that supposedly innocently suffered abuse from all of the icky mean trolls. Not even calling them the icky mean men and boys, because that's too human. The critics had to become mythological creatures for this story to be truly potent. You see, one of probably many things that every fourth wave feminist shares in common is that they all claim to want to start a cultural dialogue, but they not only refuse to take criticism directly, but they generally tend to refuse to even acknowledge what that criticism actually even might be. As somebody who majored in creative writing at a college where every class of mine had no more than 15 students in it, I have to definitely wonder how somebody becomes a successful writer without learning the seeming fundamental basics of writing skills. How do you become a good writer without learning how to take criticism? Again, in the case of fourth wave feminism, aka the least necessary and downright regressive social movement that has probably ever existed, the answer would obviously be politics. Still, you then have to wonder what the hell the politician who put these feminists up to all of this were thinking, and just how far they were willing to take their censorship of their opposition if they were to have been put into full governmental power. I mean, millions and millions of people know that Anita Sarkeesian is a serial liar, and I like to think that nobody in government thought that they could shut all of us up. But Maybe they did, and they plan to? Regardless, in an alternate universe where Anita Sarkeesian was an actual gamer and didn't have to steal people's YouTube game playthroughs to make her garbage videos, and yet she still managed to make some annoying feminist arguments that people had logical ways of criticizing, things could have gone much differently. Had Anita Sarkeesian taken her shots head on, just like everybody on YouTube in the skeptic sphere does, she could have evolved her arguments and maybe even maintained her identity as a feminist. Lacey Green, I believe, still does identify as a feminist, though of course, when Lacey admitted that maybe her fourth wave intersectional feminist ideology was not the be-all and end-all of all that is true in the world, by saying that she was open to discussion with the other side, it became clear that feminists as a whole are not open to evolution or critique. Still, if you're a young creative and you can't take criticism, how the hell else do you think that you are going to grow? I'm stating the obvious here, but how will you know if your observations and theories about the world have any basis in reality if you aren't even open to testing them in the court of public opinion? And you disable all of your comments, use the block bots on Twitter, and refuse to have conversations with people who don't agree with you. And that's not even where it ends with these serial liars like Anita Sarkeesian, Kat Black, and Lindy West, who actually did go on cable television to lose a debate to Jim Norton, Lindy West did, but then promptly found a way to play victim afterwards because of tweets that people sent to her, going on to continue lying about what Jim Norton's arguments actually were and why people were mad at her ever since. No, these feminists won't simply refuse to take criticisms, they will then go on to lie about what the criticisms actually were, lie about her critics, and thereby entirely invent a story about the motives of their critics as a way to keep their particular echo chamber in an alternate reality, which is the fourth wave feminist mentality where countless people genuinely do believe that Anita is the nice person in this conflict, protected by mainstream media like the Colbert Report that is more than willing to cater to this narrative, protected by endless blog articles praising Anita, and protected by others crafting hit piece articles towards her critics, also protected by social media sites like Facebook and Twitter, which are beyond biased in favor of feminists. This delusional echo chamber can exist like a veritable aristocracy, telling Sargon to eat cake for fucking years. And so, finally, when he never just goes away, but rather gets more popular and thus more powerful, and the queen feminist Hillary Clinton ends up losing the election, and finally Anita is in the same room with Sargon, she shows her true colors tragically and with so much obvious overconfidence that it couldn't have happened in a more glorious way. She was completely oblivious to the way that the world would perceive this. Now, in the alternate reality where she wasn't entirely a fraud that had lied about her entire premise as a gaming critic who actually plays games to begin with, if she had taken criticisms years ago and used it to grow and refine her positions as a feminist gamer, things might have turned out in a different way. If Anita still faced relentless criticism videos from Sargon after she fairly attempted to address Sargon's points, and yet his hate boner was just so strong that he ended up showing up to her panel at VidCon anyway to awkwardly sit in the front row, then maybe she wouldn't have flipped the fuck out so foolishly. All she would have had to do would have been to take the high road, state the obvious, and her female privilege victim card would have been more than enough to carry her to safety. She could have just said, Yeah, I have been making these videos for years, and it's like I can't do anything right. And one of my most big critics is right here in the front row staring at me awkwardly. If she had said that, even in the actual reality that we do exist in, Anita would have looked somewhat good, and Sargon would have looked kinda like some sort of stalker. Though granted, if she had said that in the real universe, she would have still been being dishonest because saying, "It's not like I can do anything right," would imply that she had attempted to at least take the criticism. Still, ultimately, she backed herself into a corner by initially talking nonsense, then realizing that people saw through her nonsense, then refusing to acknowledge that she saw them pointing it out, then continuing to lie about her critics, doubling down on those lies, and finally having it reach a boil where she had to just call Sargon a name on the microphone in front of hundreds of people, which destroyed any illusion that she's an innocent victim. That said, if a politician ever pays you to advocate for a social issue, make sure you are on the right side of the argument ahead of time and that you can adapt your argument as you go. Otherwise, you'll end up as yet another cautionary tale, just like Anita. Drop me a comment and stay tuned.